Hello and welcome. I'm Light, and this is my channel. Tonight I'm going to tell you a bedtime story. So I'll give you a couple seconds to grab something to drink, maybe a snack. Get all cozy. But you might want to leave a light on or not. That's up to you. So let's get started, shall we? Joe was running behind the dogs. They were barking incessantly. The woods were pitch black with only the light of 3 flashlights. The first, obviously Joe's. The second, Keith Barker, her right-hand man. Keith Barker had been on the force for 15 years. He'd grown up in the area and had been a local football star. He was handsome and single. The third, Mr. Blankley, an old farmer who was keeping his German shepherds outside that night. He was the man who had brought them here together when he called the station to report a homicide. The streams of light were barely lighting the way. The moon was blocked by the cloudy night. The dogs were barking just as the dogs stopped. Joe fell over a downed tree, and as she lifted her pounding head, she heard it. There! See, right there! Mr. Blankley was shouting, his voice quivering. Holy Mother of God! Joe heard Keith muttering. Joe was maybe 18 inches away from it. The body. She could hardly wrap her brain around what she was seeing. The torso was completely torn out. The neck ripped open, showing the spine. 2 holes where the eyes once were. Joe pulled herself up, and not wanting to contaminate the crime scene, she stumbled away maybe 5 feet and threw up her dinner. She'd never done that before. She felt a little embarrassed. Keith was already on the radio calling for the coroner and extra officers when Joe turned to him and said, Lights! Bring lights! We're going to be here a while. Joe had been in the department for 20 years. She was officially Lieutenant Joanne Wilkins. But in a town the size of Grimley, Virginia, everyone pretty much called her Joe. Joanne's father had been a police officer and her mother a teacher. And 2 years ago they'd moved to sunny Arizona. Suddenly, they heard footsteps of a single person pounding closer and closer. Joe was on guard for what could be possibly heading their way when the flashlight broke through the dense shrubbery and her newest officer came through. She stumbled a bit and stammered, I'm sorry, Joe. The baby won't sleep. I dozed off. That's enough. Joe stopped her mid-sentence. Is that going to be your excuse if someone needs your help immediately? Do better, Ziva. Ziva Howard had just come off of her maternity leave. Her and her husband Victor had moved to this sleepy town about a year ago. She found out that she was pregnant just weeks after she started. They'd had a boy, Ezra Gray Howard. Soon, the place was lit up like the sun. Joe stood over by the coroner, Sheila Banks. By God, Joe, this must have been a bear. As long as we've lived here, Sheila. Have you ever heard of a bear attack? Asked Joe. No, replied Sheila. But there is a first time for everything. Look, here. She pointed to the outer edge of the torn skin. You see that? She asked. If those aren't teeth marks, I'll be danged. Joe looked closer, her stomach still flip-flopping. She could clearly see the bite marks now that the lights were bright. What about the eyes, though? Asked Joe. I ain't got the first clue. Seems odd. This body hasn't been here for more than maybe 5 hours. Probably less. Plus, it's been dark for some time. Doesn't look like wildlife got to the body. Birds? Asked Sheila. There was a body once. Animals had gotten to it. Birds had pecked out the eyes, but these eyes, she pondered for a moment. These eyes are clean out of the skull. Never seen nothing like it. Like just popped right out. Joe stared at the body. Shivers ran down her spine. So, bears, what you're thinking? She asked. Honestly, honey, the closer I look, it looks more like wolves. The bites are pretty small, close together. Wolves, repeated Joe, ripping out the entire cavity? Sheila replied, I'm just guessing at this point. I'll need more time. Well, I'll leave you to it. I'll leave you with 5 officers, so you put them to work, Sheila. You understand? Sheila replied, Oh, you know I will. She was holding the victim's hand. Hey, Joe, before you leave, come back and look at this real quick. Joe walked over, and not particularly wanting to, this sleepy little town did have an occasional murder, a bad fight, or domestic violence kind of thing, but those hadn't prepared her for the kind of violence that had occurred here. Sheila looked up at Joe and showed her the victim's wrist. There was a bracelet, a charm bracelet, with the name Poppy. Joe looked at it, confused at first, and then the realization began to set in. Oh my God, no. And then Sheila showed her the girl's hands, scraped and bloody, broken fingernails, bruised. She fought back, Joe. There's something under her cuticles. I'll get it tested as soon as possible. Joe? Joe heard her name, but it sounded far away. Joe, are you going to be all right? Asked Sheila. Bobby was 17 years old. She'd volunteered at the station. Joe had babysat her a few years ago. Copper red hair and a face full of freckles and the curiosity of a cat. She was always getting shooed away from reading reports, listening to calls, and talking to the steady stream of drunks that tended to spend most weekends in the jail. Joe's house, they called it. All of them harmless. They just didn't want to go home to their spouse. You know how it is. Better to ask forgiveness than permission and all. All good guys. Many had been friends of Joe's father. In fact, Joe's father had delivered Poppy in a car on the side of the road on a stormy winter night. He'd always had a soft spot for the girl. Joe. This time Joe snapped out of it. Huh? What's that? Joe stammered. You gonna be okay? Asked Sheila. Want me to have Keith go and talk to the girl's folks? No. No, of course not. That's my job. They should hear this from me. My God. What happened to her? What do I tell them? The questions were rhetorical, and she was murmuring them as she walked to her car. Joe called Ziva over. Get in my car. We're going to go to the Anderson house. Just stay quiet and let me do the talking. Ziva nodded, and she was relieved. She didn't want to have to say anything to Mr. and Mrs. Anderson. Later, back at the station, Joe was at her computer looking up similar cases. Wolf attacks, bear attacks, or attacks that appeared as though they were from an animal but weren't, when she came across 3 others. She shook her head. She could hardly believe that there were more gruesome murders like this. They were all in neighboring states. She was just reading the reports when Ziva walked in, looking tired and flushed in the face. Ziva, go home. I'll get my mama to call up her church lady friends. They'll put you on a food chain, 2 meals a day. Plus, many will volunteer to keep the place straightened up and to hold that baby for a feeding or 2 so you can get some sleep. I'll do it now. Hopefully someone can come tonight. You okay? She asked Ziva. Ziva hadn't seemed as shocked by the scene as Joe and the guys, but she was barely running on a quarter tank, so lightning could have struck her right on the foot, and she didn't think that Ziva would even notice. Yeah, I'm good. Just tired, Ziva replied. Well, take the help. I need you in full speed here. We are not going to have a straggler holding us back. Now go home. Dear baby, get yourself some sleep. Be here and be right in the morning, fully awake. I don't care if you have to drink a gallon of coffee, but be here. Eva responded, Okay, thanks, Joe. As Eva walked out, Joe looked back at the computer and started reading again. She thought about what she'd had to tell Poppy's parents today. She didn't give them the full details. She just said that it seemed that she'd possibly been attacked by an animal. She did ask why Poppy might have been in the woods, and they said that her mom had asked her to go out and hunt for some mushrooms. She was making a stew. Her mom was crying. Crying wasn't exactly the word for what she was doing, though. She was sobbing, a deep, deep, sobbing scream. It was the worst thing that Joe had ever heard. She didn't know what to do. There was no way for her to comfort them. Poppy had been their only child. Joe was feeling devastated. She hoped that the coroner would come back with a report soon. 2 nights later, Joe had thrown in a microwave dinner, watched a little bit of TV, and then went to bed. And about 2 a.m., her phone rang, startled her awake. She quickly fumbled for the phone. Joe here. And she heard a woman on the other end of the phone. Joe, Joe, this is Daisy Crockett. You know, I'm Anna's mom. Her dad and I haven't heard from her all night. We, um, we called all of her friends, and they all said that she was last seen walking home, but she didn't get here, Joe, and we are scared. Joe responded, I'll be there as soon as I can. Let me give Keith a call too, and I'll be right there. Everything's gonna be fine. I'm sure she just wandered off, or maybe she needed some time alone. I'll be right there. Stay by your phone and keep calm. Joe personally knocked on the door of every single person that Anne had been with that night. Every one of them had the same story. They'd gone out for dinner, they'd had drinks, they separated at about midnight. Anne took the path through the woods that she always took. One of her friends had taken a picture of Anne waving goodbye with a silly grin on her face and one hand making a peace sign. By now, the trail was being searched. The sky tonight was cloudless, and the moon was big and bright. Kiva had the canine while Keith and the others were shaking bushes with sticks and calling Anne's name. The dog was whimpering at the end of its leash, and Kiva made a comment that she didn't think that Barkley was fond of her, when suddenly he hit a scent and began to bark and growl. Joe took the dog, who was clamoring to be taken off the leash. Joe bent down and unhooked him while saying, Good boy, go. And he ran behind a tree and stood in his point position. He was rigid, his nose pointing down and then up. Joe walked up to Barkley and shone her flashlight in the direction that the dog was pointing, noting the strange up and down directions. Kiva was beside Joe. Keith came around the other side of the tree, and his eyes were wide. Oh, Mother of God, he whispered while crossing himself. Joe turned to Kiva, who seemed very calm for what they were seeing. Long legs, one Nike trainer on. They couldn't immediately see the other. A pair of jean shorts covered in blood, so much blood that it looked like they were black, even though the picture taken earlier showed that they were a light wash. Hanging from a branch about 6 feet off the ground, shoulders and not much more of the torso. Blood dripping into a small pool. Dripped. It dripped. It's all Joe could hear. The eyeballs completely removed. The dog was silent by now. Kiva was giving Barkley his treat for a job well done. Kiva looked up at Joe and said, So, you think it's the same thing that attacked Poppy? She seemed almost excited, but Joe brushed it off as being new to the force. Well, I'm not a rocket scientist, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say yes, Kiva. She found the question irritating at best, for God's sakes. New or not, shouldn't this be common sense? Keith had called Sheila while Joe was placing the crime scene tape around a 15-foot perimeter. Kiva was putting Barkley back in the truck. Joe watched him try and create as much distance between himself and Kiva as possible. But Joe didn't have the time or the inclination to worry about whether Barkley and Kiva were best friends or not. Sheila was taking photos when she called Joe over. "Joe, come over here, will ya?" She had a strange look on her face, confusion and fear. The look made the hair on Joe's neck stand up. "Do you see this, Joe? Do you see how this looks like canine teeth?" And Joe nodded. "Do you see these? These do not look like canine scratches. They're longer, sharper, and here." A nail broke off, Joe. A fingernail. Joe looked intently. Yes, it looked like a fingernail, but thicker, razor sharp. She couldn't understand what she was looking at. Joe asked, "Sheila, what are you trying to say?" And Sheila responded, "Joe, I've got some of the report back from Poppy. It was human saliva on those bites on the Poppy. Well, she has some DNA under her fingernails too, and I'm waiting for them to come back. But I have to say, this is the strangest, in all honesty, the most frightening thing I've ever seen in my life." Kiva and Keith both walked over, probably trying to hear what Sheila was saying. Keith spoke first. "This feels, I don't know, I can't shake it. It just feels wrong." Kiva then commented, "It's an animal, right? Looks like a bear to me." Her voice was soft, but her eyes were wide. She was looking from face to face for some type of agreement. "I mean, what else could it be?" Sheila looked at Joe, and Joe spoke softly back to Kiva. "We're not sure exactly, but Sheila has some DNA coming back. We'll know soon enough. Now, the two of you need to control this situation. The rumor mills are going to go nuts, and with the internet sleuthing, we're bound to have some looky-loos. Contain that. Keith, put out a statement in the morning that it seems like animal attacks. Nothing more." Keith crossed himself again. "Seems like animal attacks, Joe." But he put seems in quotation marks. It was only then that Kiva showed just a hint of fear. The next night, Joe couldn't sleep. She decided to go into the station and continue looking at the reports of similar attacks, and she found a couple more. The details were just as horrifying as the ones that Joe had seen herself. She reached over to turn a desk lamp on. There were 3 offices at the station, but it was pretty dark in there, and they were in the break room. She continued reading, tearing over the right upper quadrant. Eyes squeezed right out of the sockets. Loss of blood. The phone rang and scared her so bad that she nearly screamed. She answered, "Joe here." "Joe, I'm glad I found you." It was Sheila. Her voice seemed odd, and she was rushing her words. "Oh? What's going on? Did you get anything?" "Yes," replied Sheila. "I've got to come see you. It's just, well, I'll be right there." And at that moment, Joe felt something cold against her head, and she knew what it was. "Hang up the phone, Joe." She heard the voice, quiet, calm. "Kiva." "Kiva, what are you doing? Put the gun down." She started to turn her chair around. "No," growled Kiva. If Joe hadn't known it was her, she might not have recognized that voice. "Kiva, let's talk. You're exhausted. I understand. Just put down the gun." Kiva didn't respond, but she could hear her breathing pick up a faster pace. "Kiva, I'm going to turn around so we can talk, said Joe slowly and stiffly. Then she heard a noise. Not a comment from Kiva, just a noise. So she slowly began to turn the chair around, and as she did, she heard the gun drop to the floor. She felt a rush of relief until she was facing Kiva or something. It had to be close to 6 feet, if not more, covered in thick black hair that shone in the dimly lit room. Its eyes were blue, the same light shade as Kiva's, the mouth gaping open with a tongue that was bright red, bearing razor-sharp teeth, growling now, a deep, guttural growl. Joe had nowhere to go. The size of this beast was holding her hostage in her chair. Her mind raced. Would she have time to grab her pistol? Would she suffer the same gruesome fate as the two young victims? Suddenly, it brought its arm back as far as it could, and Joe realized that this would be a massive death blow. So she screamed. She screamed as loud as she could for the officers to hear, knowing that they'd come in just in time to see her torn apart, that her body would be evidence. She gripped the chair handles, and with everything in her might, she raised her legs and kicked the thing in the stomach. It knocked it off its feet, but only for a second, and now its eyes were fiery red, and it leapt onto her. Joe closed her eyes, recognizing that she was still screaming when she heard it. The bang so loud she thought her head was being smashed between the giant hands of the thing, and then another bang. 3 officers rushed in just as the beast fell to the floor. Sheila was standing behind it, looking strong in the darkness. Her stance was wide, her hands unwavering. One of the officers broke the silence. "Oh, Jesus Christ, what in God's name is that?" he asked. It was slowly becoming less beast-like and more Kiva. Jo was shaking, her mind spinning. She looked at Sheila through her watery eyes. Her body felt like it had been crushed. She was gasping for air. She heard someone calling the fire department, but she was still making contact with Sheila. When Sheila spoke, I, I got the DNA back. It was in the registry, just like all first responders, and it was Ziva's and canine. To Joe, it felt like the world was standing still, even though the lights were fully on and officers were calling for backup. Sheila went on. "I came to show you, and, well, I'm a little superstitious like my daddy was, and so I grabbed a couple of old silver bullets of his. Figured it couldn't hurt." Of course, the local news came, but there was no trace of a monster anymore. Just Ziva. The internet lost interest pretty quickly, and Ziva's husband took the baby and left town in the dark of night. Jo still wonders where they went. She still looks up cases similar to the deaths of Poppy and Anne. She sleeps with a pistol loaded with a silver bullet, just in case. Thank you for coming to my channel, and good night.